I feel like airport parking is one of those things that somehow always sneaks up on you when you're booking a trip. Like you'll spend all this time finding a good flight, maybe even a good hotel deal, and then at the very end, you go to figure out parking and you're like, wait, why is it so expensive? It's literally just my car sitting somewhere for a couple days. Why does it feel like I'm adding another mini expense onto my trip for no reason? So instead of just guessing or defaulting to whatever I used before, I wanted to actually sit down and compare a few different airport parking platforms in a realistic way. Not at the airport, not in a rush, just how most people actually book, which is sitting at their computer or on their phone, trying to figure out the best option without overthinking it too much. So that's exactly what I did. I picked one airport. I used LAX because it's a major one near me with a lot of options, and I chose a really normal travel window, Friday through Monday. Nothing unusual, just a typical long weekend trip that most people would take. And I decided to compare 3 platforms that come up all the time: SpotHero, airportparkingreservations.com, and on-air parking. Going into this, I had a few things in mind that I wanted to pay attention to. Obviously price, because that's the main reason people even look at alternatives in the first place, but also how close the parking actually is to the airport, whether there's a shuttle included and how straightforward that seems, and then just the overall experience of booking, because saving money is great, but not if it makes your travel day more stressful or confusing. So I started with SpotHero, which I feel like is probably the most recognizable name out of the 3. When I open it up and put the dates and airport, the first thing I notice is that there are a lot of options, like a lot. And at first that feels like a good thing because you're thinking, okay, I have choices, I can compare, I can find something that works here. But then once you actually start scrolling through, it becomes a little bit overwhelming. You're seeing different prices, different distances, different types of parking, and it's not immediately clear what's actually the best value. I'm seeing options around $18 a day, and then $22, and then $25, and they're kind of all just like mixed together. So then I started clicking into a few listings to understand what I'm actually getting. And this is where it takes a bit more effort. You have to check things like whether a shuttle is included, how often it runs, how far the lot actually is from the airport. Some listings sound like they're close, but then you look a little bit closer and they're a bit farther out than you'd expect. And it's not that the information isn't there, because it is, but it feels like you have to do a little bit of work to piece everything together. It's very much a marketplace experience, which makes sense because SpotHero isn't just focused on airports. It's for city parking, events, monthly parking, all of that. So airport parking is just one piece of a much bigger platform. After that, I moved on to airportparkingreservations.com, which feels a little bit more focused right away. The layout is simpler and it's clearly centered around airport parking, so it already feels a bit more relevant to what I'm looking for here. When I put in the same dates and airport, the prices here are a little bit more consistent. Most of what I'm seeing falls somewhere in the $15 to $20 per day range, which is slightly better than some of the higher options on SpotHero, but still not what I would consider cheap. As I started clicking through the listings though, I noticed a few small things that make the experience feel a bit less seamless. Some listings clearly say free cancellation, but others don't, so it's not totally consistent. That means you actually have to pay attention to the fine print, which isn't ideal when you're trying to book something quickly. I also saw mentions of needing to print your reservation for certain locations, which just feels a little bit outdated at this point. Most people expect everything to be digital and easy to access on their phone, especially when they're traveling. So while the platform works and you can definitely find a decent option, it doesn't feel particularly modern or effortless. Then I opened on-air parking, and this is where I started to notice a more obvious difference pretty quickly. The first thing that stood out to me was the pricing, because it's noticeably lower right away compared to the other two. For the exact same dates and airport, I'm seeing options in the range of about $8 to $12 per day. And I actually paused for a second because I wanted to make sure I hadn't entered something incorrectly, because that's a pretty big gap compared to what I had just seen. So naturally, my first thought was, what's the catch? Because cheaper usually comes with some kind of trade-off. And that's when I looked into how their pricing actually works. Instead of just listing everything like a traditional marketplace, they use a different model where they offer access to discounted inventory from parking facilities that have extra space. So basically, these facilities can fill unused spots at a lower rate without heavily advertising that lower price publicly. It's similar to how certain travel sites can handle discounted hotels, and that's what allows the prices to be lower without necessarily cutting back on the actual experience. After understanding that, I went back to the listings and started looking more closely at the details, because price alone doesn't really matter if the airport experience isn't reliable. And what I'm seeing is that these locations are still near the airport, which is the main thing you care about, and most of them include a free shuttle service. The instructions are clear, the process looks straightforward, and it actually feels a bit simpler overall because you're not sorting through dozens of nearly identical options. It feels more curated, which makes the decision easier. Another thing I paid attention to was flexibility, because travel plans can change at any time. And this is usually where cheaper options can feel risky, but on-air parking includes free cancellation up to your start date on many listings, which immediately makes it feel more flexible and less stressful to book in advance. They also include things like guaranteed parking, so you're not showing up and hoping that there's availability. And there's optional protection coverage if you want that extra peace of mind, so it's not just about offering a lower price, it's about still hitting the key things that people care about so that the experience feels reliable. At this point, I wanted to step back and compare everything side by side because that's really the point of doing this kind of test. With SpotHero, you have a very large platform with a ton of options, but you're often paying more and spending extra time figuring out what's actually worth booking. With airport parking reservations, it's more focused on airport parking and a bit more consistent in pricing, but the experience feels a little bit more manual and less streamlined. And then with on-air parking, you're getting the lowest price pretty clearly while still maintaining the essentials like proximity to the airport, shuttle access, and flexible booking. It feels more simplified, which honestly makes the entire process just that much easier. What stood out to me the most isn't trying to position itself as some kind of luxury upgrade. It's very clearly designed for people who just want a smart, affordable option that still feels dependable. And I think that's how most people actually think about airport parking. They're not looking for something like premium, they just want something that works and doesn't cost more than it should. When you actually look at the total cost over a few days, the difference becomes really noticeable. For a 3-day trip, you could easily end up paying $70 or $80 on one platform versus closer to $30 or $40 on another. And that's not a small difference for something as simple as parking your car. So after going through all 3 of these platforms in a realistic way, it's pretty clear that they're not all the same. And if your goal is to save money without making the experience more complicated or stressful, on-air parking stands out as the option that makes the most sense, in my opinion. And now that I've actually compared them side by side like this, I feel like I can't unsee the difference because it's just too big to ignore.